kiss for you.
Alright, the 12 common tech myths that are no longer true are on screen now, so if you're just looking for that, then you can obviously quit off the video and I'll try to explain it the best I can. So the first thing, obviously, charging phones overnight is no longer a problem. If you're not aware, it used to be a problem back in the earlier iterations of phones and phone batteries as well. When charging overnight, there was not that smart stopper to basically stop charging at 100%, so it would eventually drain the battery quite quickly. This is now no longer the case, and while technically speaking, it will degrade your battery's health more quickly over time than anything else. This is a pretty moot point because other things like wireless charging will also do that. This isn't actually related to the fact that you're sitting at 100% for too long. It's actually more the fact that charging inherently takes a lot of heat, and so anything that makes your phone generate a lot of heat will eventually degrade your battery health over time. This can include things like wireless charging, using GPS a bunch, right? Charging your phone while doing other things, maybe looking at maps or playing music or something. If you're just using your phone sort of casually and not, a power user, using GPS a ton, using music a ton, that kind of thing, your phone will last longer than someone who isn't. If you're a power user, if you're someone that's using stuff more frequently, your battery life is going to degrade quicker than someone who isn't. You do not and no longer should need to remove your background apps. So this is for phones, more specifically because they tend to try to save battery life. And so if you've ever swiped up on an Apple device and saw all those different options there, as well as if you went into something like background apps and had all of them here, you do not need to basically swipe these away. It used to be that doing this would help memory management and battery life because it wouldn't be loading everything in the background. Again, now the software in this case has gotten smart enough to be able to do that for you, and a lot of the times actually it can be detrimental because if you get rid of these icons from here, it has to basically reload it back into memory, which takes more time and also will eventually, doing the same thing over and over again, could lead to actually worse performance over time. That's not to say that it's going to be like a crippling thing, but just know that a lot of the time now, especially with phones getting more memory as well as better like background app management, that you don't need to do this anymore because it's not actually saving you any time. A lot of the time it's actually making it worse, right? Because it has to go reload it. So that's the other thing, is make sure that you definitely, if you're doing this, it's a habit obviously, but you don't need to, and it's actually better for your phone if you leave it open so that it can, resume it as quickly as possible. That's number 2. Number 3, you don't need to worry, most of the time anyway, about dropping your phone in the toilet, for example, or running underwater to clean it or anything like that. Phones now have IP68 water resistance. The majority of them do, unless you're talking about something like a folding phone, and in that case, they're a little bit more careful, but generally speaking, you can wash it underwater, you can use soap, you can do all that, and it will be fine for a large quantity of uses. The issue you get into is if you drop into a pool, it might not work as well because that's obviously chlorine, and that damages the components, as well as like salt water for oceans and stuff as well, also damages components because of the salt water gets into like the charging port and the speakers and stuff, and so that kind of messes it up. But generally speaking, if you're using fresh water, warm water, and other things like that, you're going to be fine in terms of you can wash it with water, it'll be fine. You can do the screen, you can do all that. The only thing you obviously have to be concerned about is if you have like a crack in your screen or something, then you are kind of no longer water resistant, because if water gets into that crack, it could mess things up behind it. But generally speaking, as long as your phone's like in a good condition, able to put it underwater if you need to wash it or something, it's perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about any of that because we have higher ratings now. So before that wasn't the case, you had to be pretty careful, but now everything has IP68 water rating, which also includes dust, right? That's number 3. Number 4, Bluetooth. A lot of people still are under the assumption that Bluetooth is worse than wired in terms of the connection quality and sort of the general usability of it. And they were right. When Bluetooth was in its infancy, it had a lot of problems with disconnection, with the distance you could be, with other devices being interference and all that. And this very nice guide by TCL here talks about the latest version of Bluetooth 5.3 versus its predecessors and all that, and obviously to state that 5.3, which was released about this year, does things like lower the consumption when in use, connections create less interference, greater connection security, versus older forms like Bluetooth 4.0, for example. That wasn't always the case. You would want to be wired because that Bluetooth was pretty unstable. It could get messed up by interference from waves of radio waves or anything else, right? That's not the case anymore. Bluetooth is very stable at this point, and it goes up to 5.3 here. So as long as it's in that 5.0 to 5.3, obviously higher is better in this case, but generally speaking, you don't have to worry about Bluetooth or connection anymore. So if anyone's saying, oh, don't buy, Bluetooth earbuds because the connection's going to be bad, most of the time, unless there's a specific review for an earbud saying the connection's bad, most of the time, just based on the Bluetooth itself, the connection's going to be perfectly fine. So you don't have to worry about that. The next thing Windows fast startup. Now, this is in relation to the fact that a lot of people will still go down here to Windows, go to the power button, and shut down their computer every single time they use it. You don't need to do that anymore. You didn't really need to do it before, but you definitely don't need to do it now because Windows has fast boot. Basically a form of sleep, so that even when you do shut it down, it's still able to pop up very quickly, obviously depending on your setup and as long as it's up to date. But even at that point, the fast start is kind of designed to decrease the time it takes the computer to start back up again. The reason shutting down was really important is because a lot of the time it would need that to kind of reset all the memory and stuff, and now I can just do that kind of without needing to shut down. And so you don't need to shut down your computer every time you use it. You can just go to sleep and it'll be fine. Occasionally, you'll want to restart it whenever there's an update, if it doesn't do it automatically, but that's generally speaking the only reason you want to shut down your computer. You also kind of want to shut down your computer if you're going to be away for a long time, but that's more so just as a security measure, if anything else, rather than something that you need to do for its viability or its long-term health, right? It's not going to be a huge deal, and it's because we have new things like fast boot and other stuff that kind of help it along that process. So, after that, we get into more sort of situational aspects. Those are the more kind of general tips that you can get for other things that are like, oh, I thought of this and it's no longer the case. Another one here with printers is you don't need to connect to the printing Wi-Fi. A lot of printers, if they're wireless, have Wi-Fi, and a lot of old people might say, connect to printer Wi-Fi and do that. You don't have to do that. I'm not sure if this is available on iOS, but I do know at least before Google killed their version of it, you can get basically any printer you have tends to have service plugins, which basically is a thing that downloads to your phone when you try to print from it and lets you print from your phone stuff without needing to connect to the printer Wi-Fi. Obviously, it's going to depend on your printer and all that, but HP and Epson both have printing service plugins that when you try and print from it, they'll say, hey, download this plugin, you'll download the plugin, and now you're able to basically connect, functionally speaking, through the IP address of the printer and do it that way instead of having to go through the Wi-Fi and all the jank that comes with that, right? So you don't need to connect to the Wi-Fi anymore. If you see that, you can basically ignore it. And if you have an Android phone at least, or I believe also a Windows PC, you can download the print service plugins. Usually it will happen automatically, and that way you're able to connect to the printer with a much easier time printing, right? Because I know a lot of people complain about printers all the time. Part of the reason is because they have to do that, and the service plugin just makes that very easy to do. The next thing, a lot of people do not kind of recognize the fact that you do not need to use Adobe Acrobat for your PDF viewing and printing of PDFs and all that. So you don't need Acrobat. You can use your built-in browser here, and I'll see if I have an example. Let's see. Yep, I have. Let's go. Yeah, here. So I've opened a PDF here. It's a script I had to write here, and as you can see, I can do things like mark it up. Now I'm highlighting it, right? I can draw on it. I can do stuff like erase that drawing, and I can add text to it. So I can just do that, and I can drag text around, and I can make that text bigger or smaller. I can increase it, right? I can change the color of it. All that. I can ask Copilot some things. I can rotate it for free, right? I can also change the page view from top up to top bottom. And all that's good, right? Okay, we're back up. I can increase, decrease zoom. I can do things like print, save, settings, and edit for Acrobat if I do need to edit it. This is something that's built into most browsers. That's quite important because I'm using Edge at the moment, and Edge has a pretty good viewer here. They were supposed to change it to be Acrobat focused, and I don't think they have yet, which is pretty good because I do like this and the way it's set up, but Chrome also has one, Firefox has one. You don't need to pay for Acrobat to use and view PDFs because PDFs are an open source, framework, basically. You can use whenever you want, so that's pretty good, and I definitely recommend doing that. There are other options, obviously, if you do need more specific, but you don't need to pay just to be able to see and view and interact with PDFs. All right, the next one here. This is kind of getting into like the more is not better section. So the first thing for more is not better, more cores doesn't mean more performance. It used to be that more cores, generally speaking, meant better performance, but now that both Intel and AMD have switched to this kind of both cores on efficiency and performance system, a 20-core CPU, if most of them are for smaller workloads, is not going to be better than an 8-core CPU with all 8 cores running at full throttle, right? Now, more cores do help with things like multitasking, right? Being able to use that to run multiple tasks at once. But as it's been pretty clear with stuff like games and unoptimized software like the Adobe suite, for example, it doesn't matter how many cores you have if the game or if the software you're using can't take advantage of it. whether through an optimization issue or just through a general architecture issue, that tends to be the case. This is why you can see a lot of the time with AMD's 7950X 3D chip, I believe it was, and the other higher ones past 7800X 3D. These were not that good for gaming because they couldn't utilize the extra 2 or 3 cores, I believe, that this chip was trying to utilize. It couldn't do it, and so you're leaving performance on the table compared to something else, and because of that, it was more expensive. A lot of games couldn't use the extra cores here because it was basically locked off. Like the software wasn't like designed to use those cores, and so it just didn't, right? And so it ended up making it worse performing because it was trying to use all the cores, and some of them just weren't working, right? So more cores does not mean more performance. On a similar note, cameras, phone cameras specifically, more megapixels does not mean better. It never has. Compared to something like the processors where, back then in like 2008, that kind of stuff, it generally meant when the architecture was normal that more cores were better, and that's how the stack worked. But similar thing here. When it was at an infancy where you had 2 or 4 megapixel cameras, yeah, it made sense that higher megapixel was going to give you a generally sharper image. But as you can see, this is a 200 megapixel camera. My S21 Ultra here is a 108 megapixel camera. This 200 megapixels bends down, basically reduces its quality down to like 16, I believe, megapixels. And that's kind of like a way to technically use more light. There's some like camera stuff, right? But generally speaking, you have to go to a separate setting in the camera to enable 108 megapixel, and then all it does is give you a more detailed shot, right? You zoom in and you can see more, right? But it takes up a lot of space. It's a long shutter time. It doesn't work with anything except the main camera, so it can't be ultra wide, can't be zoomed in, optically or anything. And so it's just kind of like that. That image is not better than an image that could come from a 12 megapixel camera, right? And this has kind of been proven a lot of the time, and a lot of it's also down to software, right? But this has been proven a lot of the time with what Apple does. A lot of people like Apple's more natural use of their cameras, and that is down to the optimization of the software. If you like the sharper, contrastier look of Samsung's photos, then you're going to say that the 200 megapixel photo looks better. However, if you like more natural stuff, you're going to say the 12 megapixel shot from the iPhone looks better. Right? So more camera pixels, in this case, does not mean better photo, especially considering the fact that a lot of the time these higher megapixels, like the one I have on my camera, needs a laser to be able to focus because that big of a sensor has a hard time doing depth of field and focusing. And so when you want that depth of field, it works pretty well. When you don't, which is a lot of the time, it actually struggles. It's hard to get a photo that has natural blur in the background or anything when you or it's easy to do that. It's hard to get something in focus because the edges here will be pretty rough because it's not how the camera focuses, right? And so a lot of the time that it's a little bit more finicky to even get this higher megapixel count, but that higher megapixel count is not inherently better than a lower megapixel count, especially when you're looking at images uploaded to like Instagram or Twitter or anything like that. Those are going to be compressed to hell anyway. And so at that point, especially, it's better to use a lower resolution so that it doesn't get bit crushed. The last part for the more does not equal better. More cell bars does not mean better signal strength in, I guess, what people would typically assume signal strength is. It doesn't mean quality. So strength is not equal quality in this case, right? And you can kind of see it from here. Signal strength just means what's your connection to the tower for my or to the Wi-Fi, right? For my example, I'm using T-Mobile and I have 4 of my 5 bars, which means the tower that I am connected to for T-Mobile is pretty close. It does not mean, however, that the signal quality is going to be amazing, right? Quality is down here. It doesn't mean that the signal quality is going to be excellent just because the signal strength is. There could be an issue with the tower. There could be traffic. If you're not paying a lot of the time for premium data, you could get knocked off the network if it's congested, right? That would still show you great bars of data, but it's not going to actually show you what that is to use. And I think that is a good example is when you have we were with Verizon before. That premium data, when it was excellent, was pretty good. The problem is it would still show excellent in terms of the signal strength, but you try and use it and it would be horrible. It would be patchy and not super consistent because at the time we didn't have premium data for all the devices. So while my mother's phone was doing fine, my phone wasn't. It was very inconsistent, even though it showed great signal strength. So That's another thing. More cell bars, the higher that is, does not mean it's going to be better quality. It just means that your signal strength is very good. And depending on, obviously, the factors of who you're connected with and the congestion around that time, that can definitely be disconnected between the quality and the signal strength. All right, the last two here. Turning off Wi-Fi or Bluetooth does not save your battery life. It's a common misconception. It really doesn't. Draining and Bluetooth and all that stuff does not, because Bluetooth does not work and Wi-Fi does not drain. Bluetooth does not work and drain battery life if you're not using it, right? It's not just on all the time, that kind of thing. It may have at one point when we weren't as good at memory management and stuff on the software side of phones and laptops and stuff, but generally speaking now, it does not. It's not going to drain your phone. It doesn't matter if it's on or not. You can leave it on all the time. It's not going to affect anything. Same thing with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi does not drain your phone in any capacity. You don't have to turn it off, nothing like that, right? These are wrong. It's a common misconception because at the time, a lot of phones, when they were struggling with battery life, were like, oh, turn off Bluetooth, right? It's an extra feature that you don't need, or most people weren't using at the time when the iPhone 4 came out or something. And so they didn't need it, and so they turned it off to get better battery life. That's not how it works. Bluetooth does not affect your battery life. When you connect something to Bluetooth, then it affects your battery life. Because you're connecting something through that signal's using stuff, but just having Bluetooth in general being on without being actively used does not do anything. Same thing with Wi-Fi, right? Even if you're connected to Wi-Fi at the moment, Wi-Fi is not an actively draining thing. It's just like the connection there. All right, the last one. This is quite important as phones continue to evolve. This obviously is for more than just phones, but a lot of the time people talk about it in phones, right? This is also for laptops, basically anything with a battery. Basically anything with battery. Bigger battery does not mean better battery life. If you are running something like a laptop and that laptop has a 4K OLED screen, it doesn't matter how high wattage, megawatts your battery is, it's going to drain way quicker than a 1080p screen, right? This phone, the ROG 9 or whatever, having a very ridiculously high refresh rate, 144 hertz, and a lot of internals and stuff, and a very souped up processor, is going to drain its 6,000 milliamp hour battery way quicker than a phone that has that same amount that maybe doesn't have that, right? One that has a lower end processor, or one that has a lesser screen, right? Or lesser internals that need cooling. Your battery amount isn't, and you can see that with the iPhones, right? Because the iPhones don't have that big of a battery life. Like the most recent iPhone 16 battery life capacity went up a little bit. Let's see if I can find it. Yep. So went up, right? The 15 Pro Max is 4,400. The 16 Pro Max is 4,600. So it went up a little bit, right? You can see these numbers. These numbers, again, are generally pretty low. My S21 is 5,000 milliamp hours, and yet it's going to lose to every single phone here. And I'm not joking. Even the more recent Samsung phones are going to lose to most iPhones in this lineup here because they're able to use that battery life more effectively with their memory management on iOS as well as just general processors, right? Their A19, whatever, A18 Pro and stuff are very power efficient. They're ARM stuff. And so you're not going to deal with a lot of issues when it comes to battery life because it's able to sip very low power compared to something like Snapdragon for Android side, which isn't able to optimize at all. And so it's going to drain a lot more power, right? And we even saw that Android phones were not only worse battery life, but getting very hot because their performance and the way that chip was running was very hot compared to other things like the iPhone, which has a very power efficient chip. It's not running a bunch of watts, it's not getting too hot, generally speaking. And so you're able to lower the battery amount and still get great battery life because it is very efficient, right? So bigger battery life does not mean better. All right, I think I covered everything. Hopefully that made sense. I'll just go back here and do a recap. These are the 12 that I thought were most interesting. I try to do ones that, generally speaking, were things that used to be true that aren't true anymore because I think that's a little bit more interesting than just kind of covering misinterpretations, right? But I did want to obviously get some of the more important misinterpretations out of the way because they're misinterpretations for a reason, right? But generally speaking, I think these are pretty good overall things. A lot of them, people know, but I think a lot of them people definitely don't know, especially if you're not keeping up with this stuff. So hopefully you found that useful, and I'll see everyone in the next video.